true Home Alone horror. This story totally happened in the suburbs of New Orleans during Halloween 2010. I was sent this to me by a viewer. I just want you to hear the story, not make it happen. It was very dangerous, and my following story is the tragic end of 4 people: Sophronia, Wilder, Eulalia, and Frost. Frost performed a spirit-summoning ritual out of curiosity. The story may have some shortcomings, please understand. And here's the Halloween horror ritual true horror story. Soon after returning from the abandoned house, Sophronia thought that if she just tried to forget everything, her life would return to normal. But on the first night, as she was getting ready for bed, a strange scratching sound came from the window. At first, Sophronia thought it was just the sound of tree branches hitting the glass because of the strong wind. But the scratching sound kept repeating, as if someone was deliberately trying to attract her attention. Wilder has always been a confident and carefree person, but after the night of the seance, he realizes that he has made a terrible mistake. It all started with the sound of footsteps in the middle of the night. Clearly the sound of heavy shoes on wooden floors. Wilder jumped up and searched the apartment, but found no one. Still, the footsteps continued to echo as the night wore on. Eulalia tried to ignore it all, believing that as long as she didn't pay attention, everything would pass. But she was wrong. One morning, when she woke up, she found herself lying in the middle of a circle of blood, surrounded by symbols identical to the ritual they had performed. With no memory of how she got there, Eulalia began to panic. Frost, the mastermind of the ceremony, understood the dangers of what they had done. Once home, he began searching for a way to break the curse, but all Frost's efforts only led him down darker paths. Ancient books, mysterious forums, all give warnings. Once the ritual is broken, there is no way to escape the punishment of the spirit. 3 days before the ceremony, on a cold Halloween night, four friends, Frost, Sophronia, Wilder, Eulalia, gather in an abandoned house on the outskirts of New Orleans. The house has been vacant for years, is notorious for its ghostly stories, and seems like the perfect place for their crazy idea to perform a seance. Frost, the master of ceremonies and the most superstitious of the group, had found an ancient ritual on a dark web forum. The ritual required the use of mysterious symbols drawn in blood and strange incantations. Although the others were a little uneasy, they decided to go ahead, treating it as a Halloween prank. Wilder, with a confident smile, joked, "We're going to summon a cute ghost, not a demon, so don't worry." Frost, Sophronia, and Eulalia laughed, but their smiles quickly faded as the ritual began. They drew strange patterns on the ground with their blood. The air in the room grew heavy, and the howling wind outside the window made them shiver. Frost chanted the incantations aloud, his voice echoing in the dark room. As soon as the last incantation was uttered, Eulalia's flashlight went out, and the room was plunged into darkness. Footsteps echoed on the rotten wooden floor, though no one moved. Sophronia felt as if someone was standing right behind her, breathing heavily and leaning close to her ear. "Hear that?" Sophronia whispered, her voice trembling. Immediately, the old wooden door suddenly swung open, creating a deafening sound. Wilder, always the fearless one, began to lose his cool. "This isn't funny," he shouted, his eyes darting around to find the prankster. But everyone sat still, terrified of what was happening. Eulalia saw something move in the corner of the room, a tall, thin, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. She screamed in horror. Wilder, unable to bear it any longer, rushed forward and kicked away the candle that was placed in the middle of the circle. The ritual was broken in an instant. Frost shouted, "Wilder, don't break the ritual." But it was too late. The blood symbols began to melt strangely, and the room shook. The air became so stuffy that they could hardly breathe. A shrill laugh rang out from the darkness, as if someone had been released. Frost sensed the presence, a vengeful spirit. Gathering her courage, Sophronia walked to the window and drew back the curtains. In the dim light from the street lamp, she saw a dark figure standing silently outside the door, tall and thin, with glowing red eyes staring straight at her. She screamed and backed away, but when she turned around, she realized that the walls of the room were covered with scratches, just like the marks of sharp nails. From then on, Sophronia suffered from insomnia. She felt like she was being watched everywhere, in the bathroom, in the dark under her bed, and even when she went out. Her friends and family didn't believe her, thinking it was just post-traumatic stress disorder. Sophronia gradually lost control and became severely paranoid. She eventually locked herself in a small room, eyes wide open, and constantly muttering about a pair of red eyes watching her from every corner. No one could pull her out of her obsession, and her life was forever plunged into darkness and fear. During the day, the furniture in the apartment was constantly being moved from its original position. When Wilder stood in front of the mirror, he saw blood drawings identical to the ritual they had performed, clearly imprinted on the glass surface. These images appeared not just once, but more and more densely on the walls, on the doors, and even on the floor. One night, Wilder decided to escape from the apartment. But when he opened the door, the shadow from the ritual appeared before his eyes, the same thing Eulalia had seen in the corner of the abandoned house. Wilder screamed and turned back inside, the door slamming behind him. From then on, Wilder never dared to leave the house again, locking himself within its four walls. He lived in constant fear, disconnected from the outside world, a prisoner of himself. Whispers echoed in Eulalia's head, strange and threatening. As the days passed, the voices grew louder, never allowing her to sleep or rest. Eulalia lost track of time and reality. Sometimes she found herself in another place, a dark world filled with twisted figures and eerie laughter. No longer able to distinguish between reality and fantasy, Eulalia completely lost herself. She was trapped in a vortex of paranoia, each day like an endless nightmare, never to wake up. One night, while standing in front of a mirror, Frost noticed his reflection had changed. The face in the mirror was no longer his. It was another version, with a cold smile and dark, deep eyes. The shadow in the mirror began to move independently, smirking at Frost and whispering terrible things. Frost collapsed, knowing he had lost himself completely. Every time he looked into the mirror, he could no longer see himself, only a black shadow with empty eyes. Eventually, he was engulfed in madness, never to escape the spiral of darkness and despair. All four, in one way or another, fell victim to the spirits they had summoned. Each was imprisoned in their own separate horror, forever unable to escape. No one knew of the strange ritual they had performed, and no one understood why they had disappeared so quietly from their world. The friends who had once enjoyed each other's company were now mere shadows of fear, forever punished by a world they should never have touched. Halloween 2010 had ended, but their nightmare had only just begun, and it would never end. The Cursed Necklace. In a small town in the north of America, as Halloween approaches, Emily Anderson, a 22-year-old girl, eagerly prepares for the festival. She always loved the festive atmosphere with costumes and ghost stories. One afternoon, when she returned home from her overtime work, Emily found a small package on her doorstep. The box was from Maggie, her best friend from high school, who lived in another state. Inside was a silver necklace with an old coin pendant, worn and covered in rust. The strange symbols engraved around the edge of the coin made Emily feel a momentary chill. But thinking that this was just a normal gift, she quickly smiled and put it around her neck. Emily had no idea that, from that moment on, she had unwittingly opened the door for a dark entity. Just a few hours after wearing the bracelet, Emily began to feel strange. In her quiet apartment, she heard whispers so soft they were almost imperceptible, as if someone was talking right behind her. When she turned around, of course, there was no one. That night, while sleeping, Emily was startled awake by a noise. A knock sounded from the corner of the room. She turned on the light and saw her wardrobe open. The clothes inside seemed to have been pulled down, scattered on the floor. But in a locked apartment, how could a stranger have broken in? She reassured herself that it was just the wind and told herself not to worry. However, the following nights, the strange phenomenon not only did not stop, but became more terrifying. Every time she closes her eyes, Emily finds herself trapped in a strange dream. She is lost in a dark forest, surrounded by the sound of rustling footsteps chasing after her. The figure of a woman with long, disheveled hair slowly emerged from the darkness. The woman's face had no eyes, only empty, bleeding eye sockets. Emily ran, but her feet felt like they were stuck in the mud as the woman got closer and closer. Just as she was about to scream, Emily woke up with a start. She was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. But the nightmare didn't end there. Its traces seemed to extend into real life. One morning, Emily discovered bruises on her arms that matched the handprints of someone who had grabbed her. Emily became haggard and pale. Friends and colleagues noticed that she was becoming more withdrawn and disconnected from the world around her. Nick, a close friend who lived nearby, was concerned about Emily's condition. When he saw the strange necklace around her neck, he felt uneasy. Nick suggested she take it off, but Emily shook her head. "I can't. Every time I try to take it off, it feels like someone is squeezing my neck." Nick decided to investigate the origins of the necklace. After some digging on the internet, he found an article about a coin that looked exactly like Emily's pendant. It had belonged to a witch who had been executed in the 17th century. The woman had cursed the coin, swearing that her spirit would haunt whoever owned it, dragging them into darkness forever. A stormy night. Emily texted Nick, "I feel something coming. I'm scared. Please come here." Nick drove to Emily's apartment, but when he got there, the front door was wide open, and it was dark and eerily cold inside. He walked in, calling Emily's name, but only the echo of his own voice answered. Nick went upstairs and found Emily sitting on the bedroom floor, her whole body shaking, her face completely bewildered. "You can't be here," Emily whispered. "It's here. It's right behind you." Nick turned, and at that moment, the lights went out. In the darkness, he felt a cold hand touch his shoulder. A chilling whisper sounded right next to his ear. "You cannot escape." Nick pulled Emily up and tried to lead her out of the apartment. But each step felt like she was being pulled back, not by air or gravity, but by something invisible that was holding them back. Emily began to sob, mumbling, "I don't want to stay here. I don't want to." When Nick finally got Emily out the door, she passed out on his shoulder. He felt her arms loosen, and the coin pendant fell to the ground with a cold clang. Emily was taken to the hospital, but she was never really the same again. She lived in a constant state of panic, afraid of something no one could see. Her room door was always closed, and she never spoke of what happened that night. Nick, tormented by his failure to save Emily, decides to take the necklace far away. He drives to a deserted lake and throws it into the deep, deep water, hoping the curse will be buried forever under the cold water. But that night, as he returned home, Nick heard a familiar whisper from the darkness. "I told you. You can't escape." A cold breath hit the back of his neck, and when Nick turned around, the living room mirror reflected. Not him, but the empty, bloodshot eyes of the woman Emily had met. The Last Discoverer. Thomas Anderson has always prided himself on his ability to explore places that others avoid. From old asylums to abandoned cemeteries, he has walked through them all without fear. For him, ghost stories were just a game of the weak imagination. There were no ghosts, no demons, and everything could be explained scientifically. However, the abandoned St. Catherine's School, located deep in the wild woods of Pennsylvania, held a strange attraction for Thomas. Rumor has it that anyone who enters the school never returns. Some say they see shadows in the windows at night, but no one dares to verify. It's all just a rumor, and for Thomas, it's a chance to test his limits once again. That night, as a thick fog settled over the forest, Thomas arrived at the gates of St. Catherine's School. An eerie silence fell. No wind, no night animals. Just deep darkness and an ancient schoolhouse with broken windows, like soulless eyes watching him. He turned on his flashlight and stepped through the rusty gate. Underfoot, dry grass crunched. The air was cold and thick, like an invisible blanket. As soon as he entered, an indescribable feeling immediately enveloped Thomas, as if the school did not want him to leave. Just a mind trick, Thomas told himself, and continued walking toward the main building. But as his foot touched the stone steps, the flashlight flickered. In the moment the light went out, he caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the hallway, moving quickly. His heart pounded, but he smiled faintly. Just an illusion. Thomas refused to be shaken. He had been through similar situations many times and always survived. This school would be no different. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, leaving behind a single footprint, his own. Each step echoed like an endless sigh. There was no other sound, just him and the darkness. The strangeness began when he approached a classroom. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, everything looked as if it had just been left. The desks and chairs were still intact. The blackboard on the wall had faded old writing on it. But one thing stopped Thomas. The clock on the wall. The hands of the clock read 3:15 and did not move, as if time had stopped in this room. He walked in, but the door suddenly slammed shut behind him with a loud bang. Thomas rushed towards the door, trying to open it, but to no avail. "Are you kidding me?" He shouted, but only got an echo of his own voice. Everything suddenly became strangely quiet. Outside, the fog seemed to thicken, enveloping the school. Thomas turned on his flashlight and scanned the room. Suddenly, the light stopped on a blackboard, where words he had never seen before appeared. "What is your name? Stay and learn with us." Thomas stepped back, his heart pounding. Who's writing there? He turned the flashlight around, but the room was empty. No one. As Thomas approached the board to examine the writing, the flashlight suddenly went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and he heard light footsteps somewhere behind him. Small, light footsteps, like those of a child. Shit! Thomas turned the flashlight back on, but as the light passed, a series of small black shapes appeared and disappeared into thin air. Blurry figures with empty eyes stared at him from a distance. He tried to open the door, but to no avail. The footsteps grew louder, surrounding him. A faint voice echoed in the darkness, like a creepy whisper from another world. "You will never leave." Thomas panicked. He pounded on the door, screaming for help, but his voice echoed off the cold walls. The room seemed to shrink, the air pressure making it hard to breathe. It felt like something invisible was closing in on him, pulling him down, forcing him to stay forever. He turned around, trying to find a way out, but the room was no longer the same. The old desks and chairs began to move. Small shadows gradually became clearer. Students with pale faces, sunken eyes, only two black eye sockets staring at him. "No, this is just an illusion, Thomas told himself, but the cold feeling seemed to have touched his skin. He tried to run out of the room, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. With each step he took, the hallway seemed to lengthen, the exit fading into the darkness. A few days later, friends and family had not heard from Thomas. They called the police, and a search party was sent to St. Catherine's School. When they entered, everything seemed eerily quiet. They found Thomas's backpack, his flashlight still lying on the floor, but no trace of him. The police searched the entire school, but all traces of Thomas seemed to disappear. They found only a desk in a classroom, and on the blackboard was a single message: "Welcome, new student." It is said that if one passes by the school at night, one can hear soft laughter echoing in the wind. The laughter of little spirits playing in the corridors, and if one listens closely, one can sometimes hear a man's lonely, desperate voice saying, "Don't go in. Don't come any closer." But for curious people like Thomas, that warning always comes too late. The school chose him, and now he is forever a part of it, blending into the darkness and the creepy laughter of students who never left this monstrous school. Spooky laughter from the basement. That night, in an abandoned house deep in suburban Indiana, the sky was dark, rain pounded on the roof, and cold winds whistled through rotten cracks. The house has been neglected for many years, and it has a gloomy look, as if it is hiding a terrible secret. Roy, a professional thief with a dark past, decides to break into the house. To him, this house is nothing more than an opportunity to loot antiques or jewelry that the previous owner may have left behind. Roy didn't believe in ghosts, and with his vast experience, he knew how to stay calm even in the most terrifying situations. He unlocked the back door with a few simple steps. The door swung open with a long, creaking sound. Roy stepped inside, his flashlight beam sweeping the old living room. Dust covered everything, but everything was intact. A grandfather clock had stopped, wooden chairs surrounded an old dining table, and in the corner was a long-disused stone fireplace. He quickly set to work, opening drawers and checking old boxes. Suddenly, his eyes stopped on a picture frame on the mantelpiece. The picture showed a small family, a father, a mother, and a little boy of about 5 years old. Roy noticed something strange about the child's smile in the picture. It was both joyful and creepy. The child's eyes seemed to be looking straight at him, a deep and unreadable gaze. He shook his head, clearing away the unpleasant feeling, and continued his work. However, as he rummaged through the drawers, a strange sound came from the basement. It was a chuckle, small but clear, echoing in the darkness. Roy paused, the flashlight in his hand shaking. He listened, and then the laughter came again, closer this time, as if a child were hiding in the basement, laughing with delight at his own game. A chill ran down his spine, but Roy told himself it was probably just the wind coming through the cracks in the door. Determined not to let his paranoia get the better of him, Roy gripped his flashlight and headed for the stairs leading down to the basement. He shined his light down, but the darkness below was so thick that it swallowed the light. "Who's there?" He called out, but only his own echo answered. As he turned to leave, a soft sound of footsteps echoed from the basement, as if someone were ascending the stairs slowly and steadily. Roy jumped, tried to shine the flashlight down, but saw only darkness. The footsteps continued, getting closer. He began to panic. Without another second, Roy turned and ran, but just as he was about to leave the living room, the basement door behind him suddenly flew open. A giggle rang out, now clearer than ever, like a child frolicking in a strange glee. Roy quickened his pace, but he could clearly feel something chasing him. Small but quick footsteps echoed close behind him. It felt like someone was grabbing the hem of his shirt, pulling him back. As he neared the front door, the house lights suddenly turned on, illuminating the room with an eerie, pale yellow light. For a moment, Roy caught a glimpse of a small figure standing in the middle of the room, a boy with bright eyes and a mischievous smile. The boy waved at Roy, and in a flash, he disappeared into thin air, as if he had never existed. Roy screamed. He threw open the door and rushed out, falling down the steps. When he turned back, the house was in darkness, no sign of lights or the boy. Roy couldn't believe what he was seeing. He gasped, fear tightening in his chest. The rain continued to fall, cold and heavy. He tried to calm himself and leave the house as quickly as possible. But as he took a few steps, he sensed something strange. Amid the sound of the rain, he heard a familiar laugh, a chuckle, as if echoing from inside his own head. He turned his head to look at the house again. Everything was quiet, nothing unusual. But deep down, Roy knew that he was not the only one who had entered that house tonight. Something had awakened, and it did not want him to leave without a trace. The next morning, Roy went to a roadside cafe where he sat quietly in a corner, trying to calm his mind. He began to search for information about the house. Through some old newspaper articles, he discovered the horrifying story behind it. The house used to belong to the Thompson family. Their son, Tommy, had an accident in this house. While playing hide and seek with his parents, Tommy accidentally fell into the basement and got stuck there. The boy never returned. After the incident, his parents left the house, leaving everything as an indelible, painful memory. Roy never returned to the house again, but from that night on, he always felt like he was being watched. Wherever he was, he could hear the giggling echoing in his head, as if little Tommy were still playing hide and seek. And the worst part was, every night, when Roy closed his eyes, he could hear soft footsteps approaching his bed. The game wasn't over yet, and Tommy seemed to have decided that Roy would be his new playmate forever. Jack Mitchell had just had a long day at work, and all he wanted to do was spend Halloween night quietly in his small house. It was raining heavily outside. The wind was howling, making the space feel cold. He prepared some beer, his favorite French fries, and turned on his favorite horror movie to dispel the feeling of loneliness. Just in the middle of the movie, a gentle knock on the door sounded. Jack frowned. Who would be here at this hour? It was almost midnight, and his neighborhood was quiet. He opened the door, but there was only a sheet of rain outside. No one was there. Right on the porch, he picked up a small piece of paper. Under the dim light of the porch, a scribbled line appeared. First time I just typed it. Jack felt a little uncomfortable, but quickly thought it was a prank played by the neighborhood kids. He threw the paper in the trash and returned to the sofa, trying to forget the incident. But his mind began to tense up, his eyes occasionally glancing towards the door as if sensing something was wrong. The knocking was louder this time. It was no longer a polite knock, but a pounding sound, as if someone were trying to break the door down. Jack jumped up, his whole body cold. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and rushed to the door, throwing it open in the hope of catching the intruder. But outside the porch, there was only darkness. A cold wind blew across his face, accompanied by icy raindrops. Another piece of paper lay on the porch. The second time, I warn you. This time, Jack couldn't keep his composure any longer. He locked all the doors and windows, closed all the curtains, his heart pounding in his chest. He checked his phone, no signal. No way to call the police, no way to contact anyone. And then the third knock came, louder and more intense than ever. The door shook as if it were about to burst. Jack walked over to the window and gently pulled back a corner of the curtain. Under the dim yellow light, a tall, thin figure stood right in front of his door. He wore a long black cloak, the hood covering his face. But what terrified Jack the most was the large hammer in his hand. He stood still, silent, and then raised his head. The streetlights illuminated a cracked, crooked smile and a pair of bright eyes staring at Jack through the window. Jack's heart stopped for a moment. The person saw him. Jack jerked the curtains open and stepped back, breathing heavily. The knocking turned into a louder pounding, then stopped abruptly. In a few tense seconds of silence, Jack heard wet footsteps moving around the house. Glass shattered from the back window. Jack rushed to his bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it. He knew for sure that the man had been in the house. Everything was plunged into darkness as the lights went out. The only sound was the steady rain outside and the slow, heavy footsteps echoing in the hallway. Jack hid under the bed, his hand clutching the knife, his whole body trembling. The footsteps came closer. The bedroom door opened with an eerie creak and he entered. Jack bit his lip to keep from making a sound, but his every breath seemed to echo in the silence. He stood right next to the bed. The heavy iron hammer dragged across the wooden floor, creating a creepy creaking sound. Then suddenly, a hoarse laugh rang out. "Jack, I know you're here." A cold hand reached under the bed and grabbed Jack's leg, pulling hard. Jack screamed in despair. He tried to stab the man with the knife, but he was much stronger. The hammer swung, and in the last moment, Jack could only see the man's twisted smile in the darkness. The next morning, the police were called. The house was quiet. The windows were broken, but there was no sign of Jack Mitchell. On the floor, just outside the door, there was only a mud-covered iron hammer and a final piece of paper with the words scrawled, "I'm in." In the small town of Salem, Massachusetts, Halloween is always celebrated with a lot of unique costumes. Madison Gray has never been excited about Halloween, but this year, her friends have a challenge for her. If she doesn't show up to Ashley's costume party in an impressive costume, she be labeled a coward. Not wanting to be teased, Madison decides to find herself a unique mask. On the last day before Halloween, Madison wandered into an old antique shop tucked away in a back alley she had never noticed before. A wooden sign hung in the window with faded letters, "Mystery Shop." Madison pushed the door open and entered. Inside the shop was a quiet and dark space, filled with strange items, pendulum clocks, old dolls, and countless spooky decorations. The shop owner was an old man with sunken eyes, standing silently behind the counter with a strange smile on his face. Madison walked along the shelves, and then she saw it, an exquisite white porcelain mask sitting quietly in the corner. The mask had deep black eyes, bright red lips with a slight but crooked smile, as if it was hiding some secret. A chill ran down her spine, but Madison couldn't take her eyes off it. "This mask is special," the old man said hoarsely, his eyes glowing in the darkness. "But remember, don't look in the mirror after midnight while wearing it." Madison laughed. She thought it was just a prank from the old man. She quickly paid and walked out of the store with the mask in hand, not knowing the terrible things that awaited her tonight. On Halloween night, Madison wore a simple black dress and a porcelain mask. When she walked into Ashley's party, all eyes were on her. "Oh my gosh, this mask is amazing. You look like a queen of the night," Ashley complimented. Madison chuckled under her mask. A strange feeling spread through her, confidence, power, and mystery. She danced, talked, and was the life of the party, something she had never done before. But as the night wore on, she began to feel something was wrong. The mask began to tighten on her face. Every time she tried to remove it, it felt like it was clinging tighter to her skin. The laughter around her became distant and distorted, as if she was being ripped away from reality. "Madison, are you okay?" a friend asked, but Madison couldn't answer. Her mouth felt numb, as if the mask had become one with her face. Unable to bear it any longer, Madison left the party and quickly ran home. Her bedroom was dark and quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Madison rushed into the bathroom, turned on the light, and looked in the mirror. The eyes in the mirror were no longer hers. They were black, lifeless, and the smile on the mask gradually widened, distorting in a way that a human face could never do. Madison recoiled from the mirror, panicked. But then she heard a whisper from the mirror. "We were one." The whisper echoed in Madison's head, and she could feel the mask moving, its lips moving, controlling her face at the same time. It was almost midnight. The clock on the wall struck 12. Each sound sounded like a curse. Madison tried to run from the room, but the door slammed shut on its own, locking her inside. She turned back to face the mirror, and this time, the image in the mirror was completely different. Madison found herself standing in a pitch-black room, and her reflection in the mirror was smiling eerily. The face in the mirror said, "I will replace you." Madison screamed, trying to smash the mirror, but as the shards fell to the floor, they still reflected her distorted face from 100 different angles, each face giggling and whispering, "We are one." Madison collapsed to the floor, her hands shaking as she covered her face. The mask had become a part of her, flesh and porcelain indistinguishable. Whenever she tried to speak, only a ghostly laugh came out, as if her voice had been stolen forever. The clock stopped ringing, and the room was plunged into absolute darkness. The whispers still echoed in Madison's head, drowning her in a never-ending nightmare. When Madison's friends came to look for her the next morning, they found the bedroom door wide open. Inside, there was no sign of Madison. Only a white porcelain mask lay in the middle of the floor, with a crooked smile and empty eyes, as if watching each person who entered. The police were called, but no trace of Madison was found. The house was silent, except for one strange thing. Every Halloween night, giggles would echo from her bedroom. And everyone who looked into the mirror in the room said they saw Madison looking back from the other side, smiling. Since then, no one dared to go near Madison's house on Halloween night. It was said that if anyone wore the mask, they would be trapped in it forever. Their soul would replace the previous person, and the mask would come back to life in a new body. How about you? Would you dare to wear that mysterious mask on Halloween night? Just remember one thing: never look in the mirror after midnight. That year, on a foggy Halloween night, 3 best friends, Ethan, Chloe, and Tyler, decide to take on a challenge that the whole town warned them not to do. Enter an abandoned house deep in the woods in suburban Maine. Where stories of ghosts and mysterious events make everyone shiver. Even though it has been abandoned for many years, people say that there are still strange knocking sounds at the door every night, as if someone is trying to find a way out. Tyler, with his reckless nature, led the expedition. Chloe reluctantly followed, not wanting to be called a coward. Ethan, the quietest of the group, simply enjoyed the feeling of adventuring into the unknown and agreed to come along. Little did they know that what awaited them inside the house would be a terrifying and haunting experience. It was already dark when they entered the forest. The weak moonlight mixed with the thick fog made the air cold and gloomy. The Halloween lanterns of the nearby houses slowly dimmed as they walked further down the road to the mysterious house. Black crows flew overhead, cawing like an ominous sign. "Has anyone ever gone in there and come back?" Chloe asked, her voice shaking slightly with worry. "Nobody knows," Tyler shrugged. "They say that people who go in there never come out, or if they do, they're not normal anymore." He dragged out the sentence deliberately, making Chloe's skin crawl. "Stop scaring me," Ethan said, his voice calm. But there was also a sense of unease, as if some invisible pair of eyes were watching them through the mist. Finally, they arrived. The house loomed like a giant black shadow in the woods, with a slanted roof and rotting wooden walls. The front door hung on rusty hinges, creaking every time the wind blew. The broken windows were like empty eyes staring at them. "Well, that looks friendly." Tyler smirked and headed for the front door. "Ready, guys?" Underscore. Into the darkness. Tyler pushed the wooden door open. The shrill creak of hinges echoed throughout the house, as if the door had not been opened for a long time. Ethan turned on his flashlight and shone it inside. Dust floated in the air, reflecting the light, giving the room a mysterious feel. "We're here, it's not that scary," Tyler said, trying to sound calm. But all three of them felt a strange chill creeping through the wooden walls. Suddenly, the door behind them slammed shut with a loud bang. Chloe screamed, clutching Ethan's arm. "It's just the wind," Tyler said quickly, but neither of them believed it was just a normal wind. As the three of them entered deeper inside, a gentle knock suddenly sounded from upstairs. The three of them stood there, their hearts racing. Chloe squeezed Ethan's hand, whispering, "How is that possible? Who would knock in an abandoned house?" "It could just be weathered wood," Ethan said, but even he didn't believe it. Tyler, still trying to sound calm, said, "Shall we go check it out?" "It's probably nothing." Slowly, they climbed the wooden stairs that creaked under each step. The knocking came again, louder and clearer this time. When they reached the top of the stairs, they found themselves in a long hallway lined with decaying doors. Ethan's flashlight beam swept across it, revealing strange markings on the wall's blackened handprints as if someone had clawed their way out. "What is this?" Chloe whispered, her voice choked with fear. One of the doors at the end of the hallway opened slightly as they approached. It creaked as if it had been waiting for them. Tyler took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside was an empty room, except for an old wooden table in the middle of the room. On the table was an intricately carved wooden box covered in dust. "Should we open it?" Ethan asked, a feeling of unease spreading through him. "Of course. We can't come here without exploring," Tyler said, his hand already reaching for the lid. As Tyler opened the lid, a loud knock sounded behind them. The three of them turned, but no one was there. Chloe screamed, her hands shaking. Tyler quickly closed the box, but the strange sound continued, getting louder and louder. "Let's run!" Ethan yelled, pulling Chloe down the stairs. Tyler followed close behind, but as they reached the stairs, Ethan's flashlight flickered and went out. "Shit," Ethan muttered, trying to turn the light back on, but in the darkness, they heard heavy footsteps behind them. "Someone is chasing us," Chloe screamed. The three of them rushed down the stairs in a panic. When they reached the front door, Tyler yanked on it, but it wouldn't open. It was as if locked from the outside. "No way, we have to get out," Tyler yelled, pounding on the door. The knocking sounded right behind them, so close it seemed like it was only a few feet away. Ethan looked around desperately and saw a window nearby. "We have to break the window," he shouted. Tyler picked up a nearby chair and slammed it against the glass. The glass shattered, and shards of glass fell to the floor. Without hesitation, the three of them rushed out of the house. They ran through the woods, not daring to look back. The knocking still echoed in their heads, even after they left the house. When they reached town, they stopped, panting. Chloe was sobbing, Ethan clutching her hand, trying to reassure her. "We made it," Tyler muttered, but his voice was no longer confident. However, when they turned to look at the house from a distance, two red lights were emanating from it, like eyes staring back at them. If you find the story interesting, please like and subscribe to wait for more scary stories. If you want me to tell horror stories about any place, please comment and let me know.